Facebook and then share it with a lot of different Facebook groups that relate to this kind of content.
Okay, Greg, you're on.
I'm on.
Oh,
Got it. I have it on Facebook, and now I'm going to start to share it to all the different groups. It's disconcerting when we can't see you.
Greg, you ready?
I'm ready, sir. Yes.
And take it, Greg.
Welcome, everyone. It's 6:20 on Monday night. You're listening to the 238th installment of the Age Out Angels Radio Hour, right here on all of them, right here on www.hamiltonradio.net Channel 2. I'm your host, Greg Rapport. If you're new to the show, I'm the founder and executive director of Age Out Angels. We provide one-to-one mentors to vulnerable youth for the purpose of coordinating the care and services that they need to thrive. We try to help young people avoid some of the horrible pitfalls that they're likely to face when they don't have a proper safety net. And this program is brought to you every week at the same time, courtesy of Doc G, William Saunders, Ruben Rodriguez, and all the fine people here at Hamilton Radio who allow us to use this airtime. Ruben is on the big board tonight. Robin is producing. So good, as always, to have both of you with me. And so good to have all of you listening from your computers or in your cars or 5 days from now on YouTube, whenever you hear this. It's good to have you aboard. Now, please take a moment. If you're looking at us on Facebook or YouTube, and hit buttons for me. We need you to like and subscribe and share. Because what you're going to hear tonight, you know every week what you're going to hear is relevant to every geographic region. It applies everywhere. This needs to be shared. And there's just too much stuff going on right now in the world, and this cannot cut through the clutter unless you help us do it, okay? So please like, subscribe, share, do whatever you have to do to let people know that they can be helped. Okay, because tonight we're going to focus on teens, specifically teens in crisis. We're going to be talking about what is becoming an alarming increase in teen suicides. First, a little light housekeeping, if you don't mind. Umbrella's inaugural. I have trouble with that word every week. Umbrella's inaugural Power to End Adverse Childhood Experiences, the Peace Initiative, is a year-long series of educational workshops and family community engagement events for foster, adoptive, and kinship caregivers, foster, adoptive, and kinship youth, and the Department of Children and Family staff and their families. These workshops and community events culminate with a day-long Health and Wellness Peace Summit, which is going to be held next year, June 1, 2024. The goal of the Peace Initiative is to create a shared child welfare community of healers, leaders, and future change makers, and provides events located strategically throughout all parts of New Jersey. Now, with such an important mission, you should know that their next event is just nothing but pure fun, okay? It's called Roll Into Gratitude. It's a family event. They want everyone to get together at a roller rink. United Skates of America, get it? Skates of America, Branch Brook Park Roller Skating Center, 7th Avenue and Clifton Avenue in Newark, New Jersey. But forget that I said that, okay? Because you can't just show up. That's no good. They have a maximum number of people. They're going to be serving a pizza dinner and skate rental. Everything's included. The whole thing is free. The entire project is funded, and it's for families, people in DCF and DCP&P in New Jersey. So please, if you're interested in participating at this, go to the Umbrella website, and it's Umbrella with an E, EMBRELLA.org, and click on events, and then click on Peace Initiative, and it will bring you to the registration for these events. Or you could just talk to me and I'll send you a direct link. You could private message me on Facebook if you like, and do it that way. Now, I've been out all around New Jersey all month long, talking to the people who would benefit most from participating in the Bridges to Employment program. And I want to tell you something, man. You don't think this is going to be true when you're 17 or 18 years old or 14. But when you drop out of school, it is so hard to go back. It's so very hard. And I think, and maybe my guest will comment on this and when I introduce her to you, but I wonder if like a lot of it's in your head, like not being able to go back because there's reasons you left in the first place. Like Robin, you're going to want to mute your mic. There's reasons that you left in the first place, and because school was just an unpleasant experience for you. You know, school was something that you never, really kind of took to, and so it is so difficult to go back. But I want to tell you, tell you, there's never been a more important and loving program. And if you can mute Robin, please, Ruben, if you can do that from your position.
Previously on Ugly Betty. I'm pregnant.
Right?
My baby.
That would be good. We'd appreciate that. Yes, so the Bridges to Employment program. Here's the thing. There's absolutely no reason to be poor right now. You don't have to be. You don't have to be a young person and be poor. What you need to do is get the right amount of education to qualify for like a zillion doors that open up. And what that means is your education, your skills have to be equivalent to a 9th or 10th grade level. If you can do that, 1 million doors open up for you and a pathway to make like serious money. When a student comes into the Bridges to Employment program, you know what's on my mind? A year from now, I want that person to be making more money than me. Now, if you're interested in doing that, I want you to give me a call, okay? But you have to have had some kind of relationship with the foster care system, all right? So think about that. It's the Bridges to Employment program. You know how to get in touch with me if you need to. From the American Psychiatric Association, more than 20% of teens have seriously considered suicide. The most alarming trend in recent years, according to this article by Stephanie Pappas, dated about 5 months ago, is a sharp rise in suicide among Black youths ages 10 to 24. My guest tonight is Kalisha Smith. Kalisha is a New Jersey licensed clinical social worker, a New Jersey certified social work clinical supervisor, and a licensed minister. Kalisha has been privileged to work in the social service profession for the last 19 years, supporting youth experiencing acute mental health concerns and providing supervision of direct care staff to youth in crisis throughout the New Jersey Children's System of Care. Kalisha serves as the Associate Clinical Director of the Society for the Prevention of Teen Suicide, where she provides training on the continuum of prevention to school districts, community organization, clinicians, and her quote is, "Shame does not move people to a healthy place, but love, hope, and accountability transform lives." Kalisha Smith, welcome to the Age Out Angels Radio Hour.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Thank you for having me here on this wonderful evening, and I'm excited to share information with you all.
This sounds like a serious situation that's becoming more serious, and I'm curious if in your 19 years of experience, are you seeing a worsening not only in the numbers, but perhaps in the intensity of the sadness level that you're seeing?
You know, it's so curious, right? I get asked that question a lot. And let me just start by saying, you know, I've done this work here in New Jersey, got my start in DC. And so, you know, I think one of the things that we are noticing is that this generation of young people, you know, they're able to express themselves and have language for things in ways that many generations didn't have before. So we recognize that the numbers are rising and are increasing, and we can talk more about that. But we also recognize that the young people are more vocal, right? So, which is great. We want them to speak up and say what their needs are. So, you know, the rise that we see, while a lot of people are attributing it to like the pandemic and kind of post-pandemic, what we've seen, especially the Youth versus Behavior Survey came out this year, and it was a trends report that looked at 2011 to 2021. And what we realized is that we've been trending in the wrong direction for many years, right? And while the pandemic has definitely exacerbated things and maybe shown a light to some degree, we recognize that our young people have been kind of faced with challenging emotional situations for a while. You know, so the hope is that conversations like this are happening everywhere. We need the awareness to spread. We need to decrease the stigma. We need to support and increase help seeking.
Why is it happening more among youth of color?
Yeah, that's an interesting conversation. And I think, you know, it's still being determined what's happening. I think there's a lot of reasons that we're seeing the increase in the way that we are, right? So a coma project, right? And they're out of like the DMV, Maryland area. They recently put out the State of Mental Health of of Youth of Color 2022. And they really talked about how youth were really struggling. A lot of times youth of color, their language around mental health concerns is not the same, right? And so now what we might be seeing is youth of color kind of expressing, while we're all talking about the same thing, like feelings, right? We're talking about emotions, but the language around it might be culturally sensitive, right? And so I tend to believe, this is just Kalisha, that sometimes youth of color were letting us know they were having a hard time already. However, we were not trained to hear them in culturally appropriate ways, right? So we're clear that the rates are increasing, but it's also clear that youth of color were not involved in a lot of studies before, right? The fact that we're having a youth of color study be like one of the first of its kind in 2022 is kind of interesting to me. Like, how did we get so far into this work and not have a monumental study such as this? So I think, it's very nuanced, it's complex, right? So we know the rates are increasing. We want to target youth of color, specifically and Black youth, right? You might have heard about the Ring the Alarm study that came out of New Jersey. Okay, so yeah, the Ring the Alarm study came out pre-pandemic, 2019. It was Bonnie Watson Coleman and the Congressional Black Caucus, and they're the ones that found a lot of this information about youth of color. Specifically Black males, and the rates increasing, and the rates for all Black youth increasing something like 73% in the last 25 years, something like that, right? But they also found, right, that a lot of the research did not include over these last however long, many years, Black youth. We also found that like interventions based on work that was out there wasn't also done in youth of color's community. Right. So there's this like duality that's happening where our youth of color are expressing that they have needs. Right. But it's up to us to decide to actually, partner with them and support them. All of our youth need our support. Yeah. All of our youth are struggling for sure, but making sure that the needs of different populations are addressed specifically is so important, right? That's why you even have a show. So important. This particular population needs support, just like youth of color, Black youth, LGBTQ plus youth, whatever we're talking about, we want to think about how do we address those needs specifically.
That's right. And we're going to get more deeply into the prevention part of this later in the show, okay? But first, I just wanted to talk with you a little bit more about the other side of getting into this, and you bring up a very interesting topic when it comes to language. Mm-hmm. I deal with an educational program, and we're helping young people get to the point where they can pass tests. Have you ever read the tests? I'll bet you have. Achievement tests and diagnostic tests. When I hear a young person of color read the questions in the test, I hear frequently that the child can decode the words, but they have absolutely no idea, what's being talked about, what's being asked about. Like in a social studies test, there'll be something that will be about the Revolutionary War, and they'll use words like rebel that just, they're just not part of the vocabulary.
Or they have a different meaning, right? So I think that's really important, right? When we think about language, I think when we're talking about suicide prevention, it's so important that we focus on language, right? And that we, because I think regardless of what community we're talking about, people understand things based on their own context and what's culturally appropriate, right? So I think that there's some shared language, shared experience. But when we think culturally, whether we're speaking racially culturally, whether we're thinking part of the country culturally, right? Because East Coast has a different cultural experience than Midwest or South, right? So kind of whatever we're talking about, we want to start to use terms that are universal, right? And so I'm going to kind of shift right here and say it's really important, do a little education, that we use the term died by suicide as opposed to something like completed or committed, right? Because what we want to start doing is having this universal language that everyone understands and that is compassionate and trauma informed, right? So when we are thinking about how do we speak of suicide, even, we want to do it in safe ways, and we want to give all of our young people the same language, right? And so this idea of die by suicide is really informed by survivors of loss and by those with lived experience. Because when we say committed, doesn't it bring up interesting connotations?
I suppose by comparison it does. I mean, it's not really something I ever thought of, but certainly to someone in the throes of that, it might have very, very much significance. Yeah.
You know, it's curious. When I do trainings with all sorts of people. When I say that word committed, and I could be in a room with people of like profession, there could be like 7, 8 different ideas about that word committed, what it means, what it brings up for people, right? And same with completed. And so what we really want to start doing is having conversations about suicide and about mental and emotional well-being the same way we have conversations about physical health, right? So if someone is struggling with a medical concern and they lose their life to the medical concern, we don't say they committed or completed that disease, right? We say they die from or by this particular disease. And really what this helps us do is to decrease stigma, to open conversation, to make it safe, you know. And so, like, kind of back to your original point, when we're thinking about our youth of color, we want to have conversation in safe ways. We want to hear from them, and we want to be able to give to them, you know, in conversation in safe ways. We want to open the door, right, and create spaces where not only are they safe, but they're courageous. Because we want people to have dialogue, just like you're doing tonight. Because that's actually what helps move folks forward.
And being able to open up in that way, I'm sure that's very, very, very hard. I can't speak from experience in that regard. I mean, I can speak from experience of deep sadness, but I can't speak from experience of being on that ledge myself. And I'm sure it's hard to be rational at that moment. And so if anyone's listening to this, by the way, this is a tough subject here tonight. Okay.
Absolutely.
If you're listening to this and you're feeling like you're getting close to that ledge, even close, do me a favor, please stop listening to the show and call 988. All right. Yeah. Talk to a trained peer advocate, someone who is going to be thinking about you right at this very moment.
Thank you so much for saying that, Greg. It really is important that we pause, right? SPTS, our mission is to educate. Our mission is to, you know, empower our young people to have conversation, to provide resources. Really nothing that we do are we seeking to trigger people or to kind of like scare or shock them. That's not how we approach the work. Although we recognize people come to whatever space we're in with their own stories. And so just like you said, there are so many resources out there. If you do feel triggered, or I say it like this, if you're in your feelings about anything that we say, please reach out for support. 988 is a great, safe place to start. But just as kind of knowledge of how we at SPTS approach the work, it really is from this idea of prevention and safe-based conversation.
Absolutely. So we talked about the increase in youth of color, but there have always been high statistics among the LGBTQ plus community, and I think that speaks really a lot to your point about people obtaining the language over the last few years, because you'd have to say that if you looked at a study from as little as, say, 10 years ago, that a lot fewer people would have been come out, if you will, as
for sure,
you know, and
like
so,
the self-identifying is what you're referring to.
And so they wouldn't have made that statistic.
For sure.
You know, and so now they're in that statistic. You know, I got to be honest with you. I have so little sympathy for a lot of the parents in that situation, because the stories that I hear, and I don't pretend to be statistically sound, I'm anecdotal to the core, okay? But you know what I hear is children who are kicked out of their homes who don't have to be. It's just not necessary. And those kids, especially, a lot of those kids, the middle class kids who find themselves in that situation are very ill equipped to approach life from a survival mode.
It's interesting that you bring that up, right? Like one of the things that we know is that when we're thinking about prevention, we know that knowing the warning signs, knowing the resources is incredibly important, right? But we also know when we're thinking about like protective factors, it is very protective to have a trusted adult, to have someone that you can rely on. And when we think specifically about our LGBTQ plus youth, what we find is that rejection from their communities, rejection from their caregivers really does contribute to how they feel about themselves, right? And the hopefulness that they have for the future. So in a lot of the work that I've done, even pre-society or SBTS, has been that like clinical work, right? Direct care with folks. And, I think in that moment, because parents and caregivers, like, I don't want to demonize them or ostracize them. They're in situations where maybe they didn't expect, maybe they don't have language or resources for. A lot of the time they want to have conversation about, their child's identity. And kind of what I try my best to help those folks see is like, there is no conversation at all with your child if your child's not alive, right? So how do we agree, right? Like that we want your child to live. So for myself, the work has never been trying to have those intense conversations to change people's value systems, because that's not my work, right? But I can say people should feel safe. People should feel connected. Folks should feel secure. And when our young people have those things, the outcomes are better for them. The evidence, the research bears this out. So a lot of the conversation is like, I hear what you're saying, parent, caregiver, guardian. However, what we're talking about is life and death, right? Like, so can we move beyond your feelings, your emotion, your whatever, and talk about, saving the life of your young person?
Yeah, I grew up in an era when if people had a child and there was anything imperfect about that child, even
that word imperfect, I had a feeling about it.
Right. What they would internalize there is that, first of all, that was somehow a reflection on them. That they were somehow deficient, right? And then they would go from there straight to embarrassment.
Right.
No, they would be embarrassed of their own child, and I guess it's not a big step to then kick the child out of the house, especially at the age of like 18 or something, because also in that era, it also was not uncommon for parents to say, "You're 18, go."
For sure.
You don't have to be LGBT anything. You're 18, go.
Right, for sure. And then you think about, kind of, if we take a second and just pause and think about the generational differences, like that matters, right? So, when we're thinking about how do we approach this work, kind of the way that we approach it with parents, caregivers, and guardians is really trying to offer them the most support we possibly can, the most education we possibly can, right? Our role is to really try to give them all the information, all the education, so they understand how they can best support their young person, right? And so, what does that look like? We actually have trainings. A lot of them are free, on our website. If you go to our website, there's so much information for parents and caregivers to address that point you just talked about. What happens when your child is not, quote unquote, typical, right? When they're outside of what you think that line is, whatever that line is, right? We could, when we're thinking about identity, we could be talking about anything. But what happens when that child is diverse in some way that you did not expect, right? Whether you're talking about neurodiversity, whether you're talking about presentation, whether you're talking about their identity, their expression, how do you manage that? So a lot of what we talk about is someone struggling with a mental health concern or someone struggling with ideation, it's not blame, right? It's not the fault of the parent. And I think that is a really important and liberating point, right? To what you're saying. Like it matters to parents and caregivers and guardians to hear, like, my child, that not that their identity or expression is a struggle or a concern, right? But just, how they show up in the world. And more importantly, if they are struggling with their emotional well-being, that is not on them, right? So I want to be clear. I don't want anyone to mishear me. I'm not saying that their identity is a struggle or a concern that they should feel something about. But when we have something that's different, sometimes people have a hard time with that, right? So it's more so, how do we help parents navigate, when something unexpected happens? I think that's a big piece of the conversation. It's about problem solving, like to support your young person. And that's what's important when you're thinking about what's next for our young people. How do they cope? Well, it's really important that they have problem solving skills. It's really important that they have support from a trusted adult. It's really important that they have connection, right? And so helping that adult to have that first, right? And to see it, so important. We also provide behavioral health toolkits, right? Some parents, it's not that they don't want to support, it's that they don't know how. Some caregivers, some resource parents, they weren't aware of how to get support. And there's so many organizations that are out there that support young people, going through emotional concerns, that support young people with suicidality, that support people who are finding their identity and their expression and their orientation, right? So how do we make sure that parents and caregivers have that information? So we have printed behavioral health toolkits that, through a grant, which we're very proud of, has gone out to every sixth grader in public school, so that their parent, their caregiver, their guardian can have access to this printed tool. And hopefully in the near future, we're going to also get it online, which will increase accessibility.
Yeah, actually, I found that online isn't nearly as valuable as phone text. I've seen so many children. I'm talking about kids now, who aren't that computer literate.
Curious.
It is surprising, isn't it? But phone text seems to be the way. Anyway, moving on. Let's talk about meds for a second. Now, when I described my worst day, I said profound sadness was the term I used. But really, it feels like when we're talking about taking your own life, it goes beyond profound sadness into maybe hopelessness. Perhaps,
So let's talk a little bit, kind of do a little bit of moment of education, if that's okay. Is that okay?
That is absolutely what we're
Okay, great. So a couple of things for us to note, right? Like, it's important, and I love that you've opened the show up to this conversation tonight. It's important for us to recognize that talking about suicide or asking somebody if they're struggling with those thoughts does not put the thought or plant it in that person's head, right? We want to talk about suicide in safe ways, right? And developmentally appropriate ways. But asking somebody if they've had the thought or if they're struggling, it doesn't plant the thought in their head. If they're not thinking about it, they're not thinking about it. What it does is it identifies you as the asker, as a safe place, as a resource. So if that person is struggling, they know you are safe to talk to them, right? And I think I can't really leave any platform without saying that, right? And if you're struggling with how do I ask the question, we can talk about that as well. When we think about kind of your question, and I want to make sure that I've captured it. So say it for me again, so I make sure I've got it.
So what I said was, it seems like when a person is coming to the place where they want.
Yes. Okay. Great.
The feeling is hopeless, like there's no way out.
For a lot of people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Is it common that it's a trapped feeling? And
for many people it is, right? But I would say that there are some characteristics that are more general regarding suicide. Not everyone feels that feeling that you're talking about. But what we recognize, I think the easiest way to kind of describe it for the purposes of today is that people are experiencing what we call crisis thinking. Right. And so crisis thinking, right, is that what happens when that like rational part of your brain becomes overwhelmed by like that emotionality part. Right. And so what we know is it can feel like that, like things are constricting. It can feel like make it very difficult to see like really the width and the breadth of what's around you and options, right? Like crisis thinking, if we all think back to a day where we were like not doing our best, right? That is not the time that most of us would decide to make major life decisions, right? Because it's so hard to process. So a lot of what we educate around is this idea that when we're talking about suicide, it's not so much that that person wants to end their biological existence, right? It's more so that they have this problem that's creating this intense emotional pain. That's really what we're talking about. Intense emotional pain, and it becomes hard to move forward because you have impaired problem-solving skills because you're in crisis thinking. So really, that's what we call the behavioral definition that we use in our program. One of our original creators of Lifelines, which is a program we use, Maureen Underwood and her associates created that or helped to develop that definition. But I think it shifts for us when we think about it in this way, right? We begin to see some commonality around feelings, around emotions, around crisis thinking, because maybe we've never had the intensity that someone who's had suicidal ideation experiences, but we can relate to what it's like to feel like you're in a crisis, to feel like you're not clear about what to do, and it's creating this intense emotional pain, right? And so maybe our intensities are different, but now we can understand, I get it now. It's not so much that they don't want to live, it's that they don't want to carry it and live with this pain the way that they are. So a lot of our work is, how do we help people, right, connect in healthy ways to others? And how do we help them move through this intense emotional pain so that they can get back to their healthy problem solving?
So better living through chemistry. Isn't there a med for that?
I think, there's all kinds of things. And for each person, it's quite different, right? Like it's a very individual process for what helps people move through hard times. But I think for us who may not be completely understanding or experiencing, right, just keeping in mind what that crisis thinking can do to a person and then what helps them to move through is important for us, right? Like, okay, how can I be supportive? Do I have the answer to every question they have? No. But can I help them increase hopefulness by helping them find a job, like you were talking earlier, or helping them have job skills? Like, yes, I can do that. So you're preventing suicide, Greg.
Hey, you know what? If I can do that by making somebody feel good about math for the first time in their life, right? That would certainly be a million blessings right there.
Talk about problem solving skills.
That's wonderful. You're ducking the question about meds.
Yeah.
Why?
I don't know that I'm ducking the question about it. I'm just very mindful, right? Like I'm very mindful that everyone's experience is different, right? And I'm also mindful that I don't want to say something that is not helpful to someone. I'm recognizing that I'm on a platform. Yes. And so for some people, medication is very helpful.
And this is to a large degree an inexact science, is it not?
Tell me more of what you mean.
I mean, well, as you were saying, you can't be inside a person's mind, and everyone's mind is a little bit different, right? We're all a product of a kind of combination of what the world has made us and things that might just be in our heads. I mean, people have told me things like they hear stuff. They don't hear like crazy voices like, people who commit crimes hear voices. People have heard, I guess it's the narration that goes on inside your head.
Okay.
Don't most people have that? Or is it just me?
I think that people experience life in all kinds of ways. So
exactly.
But I want to be clear, right? Like I want to be clear that what helps a person move through their challenging experiences looks differently. And so we don't want to ostracize or alienate a particular way. Right now, me being on this show, having just met folks, I don't know their experience, but if I was their clinician, we'd be talking about what, interventions would be helpful. For some people, it's like, I always say it's like the connection, right? It is ensuring that they're getting their basic needs met, that they have support in their crises. For some people, it's taking care of medical concerns. For some folks, it's taking care of their mental and emotional health concerns, right? And what that could look like, it can look like therapy. It can look like specific modality treatments and therapy. It can look like psychiatry and medication. So I can't say yes or no, that's the thing that will work for everyone, but it's important that we don't close doors that could be helpful to people.
Okay. I guess to some degree, it's a quality of life issue, right? If
you can see it that way.
I see a lot of young people who suffer from very, very severe anxiety. They've had rough pasts, and what's happened is nobody's business, but this is who they are today. In that context, that sort of complex childhood trauma experience, right, in adolescence now manifests, and to be honest with you, when I look at their adverse childhood experience scores or something like that, I think to myself, how are you even functioning? How do you get out of bed?
Yeah, resilience. Isn't it amazing?
Yeah, it is.
Resilience is amazing, right? And we also know we've had so much conversation, not just today, right? Like in general, in this landscape of the work, we've had so much conversation on ACEs. And it's incredibly important for us to understand and be trauma informed and healing centered. But it's also important that we don't forget the importance of PACEs, protective, childhood experiences. I think we leave that out of the conversation so often. How important it is for a young person to be connected to something that they find purposeful and meaningful, giving back, having a trusted adult, having, connection, to like healthy extracurricular activities, like all of those things also matter. So it's not like this cancels out this makes this better, or however you want to look at it. We need to look at the whole person. And I think that sometimes our conversation, we keep it only in the trauma piece, which is important. We need to talk about it. We need to be mindful of it. We need to make sure that we're supporting our young people. But in the prevention side, right, we also need to make sure that we're helping build resilience, helping foster leadership. I know one of the things that SPTS has, we have something called Lead You, which is an upstream prevention approach, which I think is a hugely important program. They're going into schools. They're having those conversations about help seeking, about resources, decreasing stigma, building resilience, right? Because that is so important for our young people to recognize that they might be going through hard things, but that is not their whole story. Doesn't have to be.
Absolutely. Now, when talking about this sort of thing with a young person, the little bit of research that I've been able to do sort of lean towards advocating for peer-to-peer discussion over youth to adult discussion under the supposition that a person will disclose more to someone who is closer to their own age than adult, with whom they may look at and have all kinds of feelings about whether those are accurate or not. So what do you think about? So I guess what we're getting to here is sort of like treatment modalities for.
Well, let's talk a little bit about treatment modalities, but definitely before we end today, if we can I want us to make sure we talk about warning signs and resources.
Okay, then do it, because then we're on the clock and we have to let you go.
Okay, just want to your point though about peer conversation, I do think it's important, and I'll just make it brief to the best of my ability. So, I think that when we're kind of thinking of the positionality of SPTS, we want our young people to be educated, right, around suicide prevention. We want them to have the information, the resources. We do like this kind of mantra or motto of friends help friends. So if they see something in like a friend or a peer, we want them to tell a trusted adult. And so in order to do that, they have to know what to listen for, right? That's really important. And the trusted adult has to be ready to hear that information and know what to do with it. So we're not in any way disparaging peer models. We think that if a young person tells you they're concerned about another young person, if you're an adult, believe them the first time they say it. However, we don't ever want a young person to feel responsible for the life of another person, right? They don't, that's a huge thing for them to like be the one to carry things. Here's what we know about suicide prevention. We understand that it takes an all of us mentality. We talk about compassionate, caring communities. That means it's not just on the one person, it's on everybody to know warning signs, everybody to know resources. So again, I'm not disparaging peer-to-peer, programming, but from where we sit, we do focus a lot on student or education. And we focus even more on having the adults in the lives being watchful and prepared to take care of that information as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But along the lines of that peer-to-peer, now we're saying to a child, you're looking for the warning signs. We're saying, tell a trusted adult. Right?
We're saying that friends don't keep those kinds of secrets.
We're saying friends don't let friends drive drunk. Right? That's what we're saying, is that if you're a friend, you're going to have to risk that friendship.
For sure.
Yeah.
Because we'd rather, I was just talking to a young person who's doing a research paper. I want to say she was in 8th or 9th grade. We were just talking about this, right? We don't want to lose a friend. So we'd rather lose a friendship, because most likely the friendship will come back around, right? I can't say for sure 100% of the time, but we don't want to lose a friend. So we don't want to keep those kinds of secrets, right? We want to bring someone in who can be helpful and who can support your friend or whomever it is that you're concerned with.
Absolutely. Now, has this idea of prevention been a part of the practice for a long time, or is this sort of a new direction? I haven't spoken about suicide much over the years, but a few times I have, and this is really kind of the first time the word prevention has ever been, really in the forefront.
So I can only speak to kind of like my experience and what I know about my organization. So our organization was founded in the early 2000s by two parents who each lost a child to suicide. And really they kind of harnessed their passion and pain and kind of, found out about the gaps in the educational system, actually, is kind of where the work started, right? And not really recognizing that teachers and staff really didn't have suicide prevention education. So a lot of what they did was advocacy and around policy. And we're very proud of those changes that were made in the system here in New Jersey, where staff get education. So that was a really big thing. I will say that since they started this organization, it's really been a mission, right, by the founders and by their original clinical directors and such, to have conversation around prevention, right? And they see it in this way. It's a multi-pronged thing. There's an evidence-based program called Lifelines. And basically Lifelines really gives information to communities around postvention, which is what you do after a tragedy. Intervention, what you do if there's a youth at risk or that you're concerned about, and then prevention, and that's actually around education in schools for the youth themselves, as well as parents and caregivers. So we've been having this conversation about prevention for a long time. And I think that there's been pockets in the field that for sure have been having it this way. But now we're at the place where post-pandemic, everybody's talking because we're all concerned.
It's a good time. It's a good time. Now, can you tell us some of the warning signs that we should be looking for?
Sure. So the way that Lifelines, the program that I just referenced, that evidence-based best practice program that we use, we talk about warning signs in this acronym called FACTS. I love it. I've taught other programs before, some of which are great, but I love FACTS because it's easy to remember. So F stands for feelings, right? So we're talking about feelings of hopelessness, you're listening for helplessness. Burdensomeness is one that I would say, particularly for the youth that you're targeting through your conversation, youth that feel like they're creating a burden for others, right? Anxiety, depression, of course, but also like that desperation feeling. We're listening for that. And because we brought up youth of color, one of the things that the state of mental health of youth of color recognized was that when youth of color talk about anxiety and depression, they tend to talk about it regarding feeling exhausted, right? Like that extreme exhaustion. So you're listening for that. So that's F. A is actions, right? So like, what is that young person doing? What are they engaging in? What does their behavior look like? Is there aggression? Are they engaging in high risk behaviors? Are they doing online searches, right? What are their actions? What are you seeing, that is concerning? And that leads us to C, changes. What's different? Right? What's their mood like the last 2 weeks? What's their sleep and their eat? Are they isolating? Kind of like, are they engaging? Is there anger increase? We always kind of talk about looking for a young person who might be anxious or depressed, but also pay attention to young people who have that sudden, increase in mood, right? That could be telling you something as well. Because they could be finding a sense of relief if they've been thinking about, dying. And so we don't want to discount that. It could be what we're seeing. So T stands for threat or talk. What are they saying? Right? And I say to parents, caregivers, adults in general, to let young people know that we take what they say seriously. So even if they're saying it as a joke, or, kind of like in a condescending way, or like, oh, I didn't mean it. I tell the young people that I work with, like, you know what, you're so important to me. I take seriously what you say. So what are they talking about? What are they writing on social media? What are they taking pictures of? What are they talking about? And what are they verbally saying? And then kind of like, what is their behavior telling us, right? And then situations are like triggering events. These are not causes of suicide, but these are things that can greatly impact how someone sees the world or how they see themselves, right? And triggering events are typically the things that we as people on the outside can see. So, it could be around loss. It could be around major transitions. Again, we're mindful of the youth that you're highlighting in this show. It could be around disciplinary concerns. That's one that we see in here that we might not always think of. So like, what are these situations that come up that kind of impact how a young person sees themselves or how they see the world? So facts, these are not causes of suicide. If you see these warning signs, it does not mean that somebody will die by suicide. It means pay attention, stop what you're doing, ask more questions, get that person some support.
Yeah. Now, is there a website? Do you guys have a website where people can go and sort of?
Absolutely.
Tell them where to go.
So if you go to sptsusa.org, there's a wealth of information, everything I talked about tonight and more on that website.
SPTS, of course, stands for Society for the Prevention of Teen Suicide.
Yes. And then USA. .org.
.org. That's wonderful. Kalisha, I can't thank you enough for coming on the program and sharing your expertise. I hope you'll come back another time.
Thank you for having me. I'm hoping that this was a helpful conversation. Should anyone want to reach out to me directly, so SPTS does not provide direct care, like we don't do therapy or anything like that, but we are like a hub of support and resources. I want to remind people that 988 is there for anyone who's struggling. Also want to remind people that in New Jersey, Second Floor Youth Helpline is really helpful, that we can provide that number for young people, and that can be around suicide or any conversation that a young person is struggling with. And if you are not aware, there's also the system of care in New Jersey for young people before 21, and you can contact Perform Care, which is a 1-point system administrator, for support as well.
And what do we do when they're over 21?
Such an interesting conversation.
Have a nice evening, Kalisha. We don't have another hour.
We'll have to come do a part 2 for that one. It is important, though. There are some resources, but it looks different.
Oh, it's
For
vital, and I hope we can do that, definitely. Okay?
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you, Kalisha. Have a good evening.
You
Everyone,
as well. Bye-bye.
that's all we have time for tonight. I want you to remember that we are off next week. We will be traveling. I want to thank my guest, Kalisha Smith, for being so incredibly articulate on a topic that is not easy to discuss. And we will see you again on November 13th when my guest will be Lawrence Drank from Legacy. And we're going to be talking about re-entry into society, specifically how incarceration affects employment. So that's going to be one that you're not going to want to miss. It's going to be very real. Join me for it. And that will be 2 weeks from tonight on November 13th. I want to thank our producer, Robin, our engineer, Ruben, music provided by Mozart. I don't know why he works for us. He must need the money. Stay safe, everyone. Until next time, remember, it's only Monday. So there's still plenty of time to make this week the best week ever. Good night, everyone.
You're welcome, Greg. I'll see you soon.